Hey guys, good to be with you again. This time talking about not such a good topic, anxiety, but it doesn't have to be that scary. I think if we know what causes it and what we can do about it. And the interesting thing is that a lot more people are having it. You know, you look at the statistics now, people that are taking anti-anxiety medications and get diagnosed and treated and all that. It's kind of a big deal. And so not only is it a big deal statistically, it's awful. I mean, anxiety is terrible. It can really interfere with your life. So we're going to jump into this and we're going to talk about just kind of what are the causes and some things we can do to make it better. But before we get into all that, let's make a distinction in the beginning between words that get kind of, thrown around a lot and sometimes merged together. And that's stress and anxiety. What's the difference? Are they the same? Well, start with stress. Stress really means it's some sort of demand is being put on something. It's getting stressed to the point of breaking, you've heard. Or, for example, an airplane can have a stress fracture or there's a stress crack. Well, it's not abnormal for an airplane to fly, but you get it under certain conditions where the material gets more stressed, then it can start to kind of show a symptom of that. And you see a crack. Ultimately, might fly apart. Well, we're a lot like that. Your system is wired. In fact, this is a really good thing. It's wired to get active and to wake up and be able to meet this demand that's being put on it. You know another word for that? Performance. It's a great thing. People with no stress are always going backwards in life because stress pulls us out of ourselves to out of a resting state to be able to perform. All right. Every morning, as soon as you open your eyes, stress because maybe your bladder's telling you you got to get up and go to the bathroom or something, or you got to go to work or whatever. Okay, there's an activation, there's a waking up. That's a good thing. It's a call to action. Okay, now when you do this, there are signs of it. There are physiological signs. Your blood pressure might change a little bit, your breathing, your heart rate, you might start to sweat a little bit, or your hands might get cold, whatever it is. There are physiological responses to a demand. Like if I went like that and scared you, things would change in your body. That's a good thing. It's a wake up call. It's great. Now here's what we know. You ready for the good news? The good news is that stress makes you perform better. Okay, if you talk to the great performers, if you look at an Olympic swimmer, Michael Phelps is standing there ready to wait for the gun to dive in the water. You can see them sort of, they're getting ready because they're activated. In fact, here's what we know about learning. For you to learn anything, you got to be aroused. Your system's got to wake up because there's chemical, binding that happens to make the new skills happen by the parts of you that are actually awake. So stress makes us actually get better up to a point. You get too much of it, and it's like that airplane. We're flying through storms it wasn't really designed to fly through until it gets stronger, right? And so there's this relationship between how much stress, how many stressors we can be under, and how strong the system is to be able to withstand that and even to make it better. You go to the gym, you stress the muscle, and it actually breaks it down a little bit and chemical stuff happens, and then you let it rest and it gets stronger. Okay, good thing. We want to stress a kid when it gets to multiplication time after they've learned their numbers and addition. That's good. All right, that's a great thing. Now, if it's too much, you go into overload. Then you start to get maladaptive symptoms. In other words, you're not just getting, your body's not getting waked up. Now it's starting to even shake, and you can't perform what you need to perform because you want a surgeon awake, you don't want him shaking. That's a different deal. So what we've done is we've changed the relationship from the demand of the stressor, like college would be too much for a 5-year-old. College wouldn't stress a PhD enough to perform and get better. It's a relationship. That's stress. Now, anxiety, when you get to anxiety, now you're talking about kind of an activated state that has I don't want to call it permanent, but it's like it's on. We can't turn it off. Okay. Stressors, sometimes you get away from the stressors and your system calms down. That's what a vacation is about. Sometimes people find out with anxiety, there's no way to shut the system off. They're just anxious and it's too heightened. And basically, what's happening here is your brain is giving out signals with anxiety that's basically telling you something bad is about to happen. It's a fear response, of anticipatory, meaning that I'm getting anxious because the roof's going to fall in, or I'm going to flunk out, or somebody's going to leave me, or I'm going to fail, or I'm going to go bankrupt. See, now, financial problems, stressors, anxiety, fears, bad outcomes. And there's certain kind of almost a futuristic kind of component to anxiety because it's a dread. In fact, the literature will describe it as kind of an overwhelming dread or feeling of doom or something bad is going to happen. You start to feel it in a lot of different ways. That's anxiety. Now, it can manifest itself in a lot of ways. Physically, we can have it, or biologically, your body begins to change under stress. Relationally, you begin to get symptoms. You're not as patient, or you snap at somebody, or you avoid them, or even in your performance. Anxiety really limits our performance. If I'm a competitive golfer. Okay, it's one thing to hit shots on the practice range. You go out there in the last round of a big tournament, and you're on the 18th tee in the U.S. Open or something like that, and everything's you the players that get too anxious because they're worried about bad outcomes. Usually, too much is at stake. Then they don't perform as well. All the way down, take it away from like super performance. It can get to where normal performance becomes undoable. Agoraphobia, it's an anxiety problem, right? The thought of leaving the house is so overwhelmingly anxiety producing that they can't even walk towards the door. Or social anxiety. The thought of being around people or going to a party or interacting is so scary that they have to avoid social interaction. Or other kinds of performance anxiety. You take really smart kids, you put them in an exam and they have performance anxiety and they can't do their SATs. Might prevent them from going to college. I had a friend one time, brilliant student, was going to medical school and was top of his class and had to take a break because he couldn't drive over the bridge to get to the medical school. Brilliant guy, inhibiting performance. So anxiety can shut us down. It can make your life smaller. All right. And that's one of the key reasons why we wanted to address this in this series is I don't want a small life for you. I want a big life with lots of territory. The world should be your oyster, right? But if I'm afraid of goo, I can't go very close to the oyster and I can't go play in the oyster. If I'm afraid of germs, I can't go out and, be in an open field. If I'm afraid of elevators or whatever causes me anxiety, it's going to limit our lives and it's going to limit our performance. It's going to be destructive to our health and it's going to take away, a lot of happiness and a lot of joy. So that's why it's so important to begin to look at. So before we get into a lot of the causes specifically that you can actually work on, I wanted to drive home this distinction between stress and anxiety because most times, and this isn't exactly right, but it's a good distinction to draw because most times stress tends to be kind of external demands that are put on us. Tax season, you're going to find an accountant is really, really stressed, or exam season for a student, or Christmas for a retailer, or a family is going through awful things that are circumstantial stressors. Now, sometimes people will make circumstantial stressors into a way of life and a pattern. It's a whole nother problem. So one of the places you want to start is look at the stressors in your life. And some of them are putting you into a situation that you really can manage by just getting out from under some of that. And at the same time, increasing your skills and abilities to deal with them. But on the anxiety side, anxiety a lot of times is really an internal process. In other words, you're looking at these feelings of anxiety and dread and ways we respond to things that really have to do with more about stuff that's inside of us. And the good thing about, external circumstances, you can get under a lot of stresses, can't get out from under all of them. Sometimes you can't control that. Here's the positive thing about anxiety that comes from the internal side is we can grow. You were designed to be able to meet the demands of life, and our brains and our bodies and our psychology and our spirituality and all that. We can grow and we can get better and we can up the capacity for not only dealing with stress but lowering anxiety, and that's what I'd like to help you with. So I want to look at some of the major causes of anxiety. Now, some of this stuff is deeply biological. I mean, you can see some people that are wired a little tighter, if you will, a little more amped up, and that's just kind of part of who we are. We have different temperaments. I mean, go in a nursery and look at babies. I mean, some of them are like, they're kind of like, they're fine with anything, and others are already, you can see law school and their future attorneys, like, they're ready for an argument, right? But we're all kind of in between somewhere, and so the biology is what it is, kind of. I mean, we can do things with that, but the major part of this, and where so many gains are to be made, are on some of these ways in which we and I'm going to use a word here that's not exactly right, but it's close. One of the ways in which we interpret our lives. Now, what I mean by that is you've got stuff that happens out there, and then our system is going to interpret that event or that glance or that look or that email or that conflict or that downturn in the market, whatever it is. Our system is going to take that information, and then internally we're going to do something with it. Okay. And what happens inside with what we do with that is going to get to some really, really key areas. And I want to talk about some of those because what that does in a great way is it leads us to some things that we can work on that are going to cause anxiety to get a lot better. Okay, the first area is this. Here's what we know about the brain, that certain kinds of performance situations, certain kinds of conflict, certain kinds of interactions, certain kinds of dynamics, they trigger our most fundamental need and our most fundamental fear. And you know what that is for? It's for relationship, it's for connection. Our biggest fear, whether we acknowledge it or not, our biggest fear ultimately is isolation because we need other human beings at a very deep level. So sometimes what happens is people are taking into a situation kind of a foundation in life of connection versus isolation that's kind of shaky. They don't really, their system doesn't assume I'm not going to be alone at the end of this. Okay. I'm always going to be loved. I've been loved so much that my tank runneth over of love. And if we have a conflict, I'm not in danger. I got some margin in there that I carry around. And that's why we want little children to feel really secure in their attachments. And we want adults to feel really secure in their attachments. Now, here's what happens: the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. You take a kid and they're really loved and feel secure and they they love relationship and they see relationship as not a threat but a goodie bag. What do? They go to school and make friends and it just reinforces it. And they learn people are a source of good things. Bad person comes along, mean to them or whatever, they go, well, that's an idiot, and they blow them off and they continue down the path. And they have great support systems and networks. And for the most part, they have kind of like, not stress-free lives, but stronger lives the more support we have. So, if you've had a lot of rejection, for example, if you've had a lot of abandonment, if you've had insecure attachments, what that's going to do is going to wire your system to interpret more things as a danger than they really are. Like if you have a conflict in a relationship, it doesn't really become about that problem. It becomes instantly, I'm going to get left. I'm going to be abandoned. I'm going to be alone. Okay. And this can trigger in a lot of other stuff. Finances, for example, a lot of, especially men, will see financial problems as a security thing that translates into, my friends will leave me, my spouse will leave me, or they see that as a power currency to keep their social world together. Now, not always. I'm just using that as an example of how sometimes some of these unrelated things to relationship really are tethered to some deep fears of abandonment or loss or rejection. So that's the first one. We fear being rejected. Now, somebody may not overtly be rejecting us, but what if you go into a situation that symbolizes rejection? Okay, a job interview, or dating, or a conflict, or an extended family issue or conflict or whatever. It can make you highly, highly anxious, depending on how secure you feel and how connected you feel apart from those relationships. Okay, if we have a lot of relationships and we feel grounded over here, then one we can live through. If that's our only one, or we think that's our only one, or we're very, very dependent on that one, big, big, big problem, a lot of anxiety. Okay, number two, control. Control is one of the biggest sources of anxiety that we can have. And what happens is, if you, again, when you're wired together, and you're, growing up and all that, if you're in a chaotic world, or people are going off on you in rage, or bad things are happening all the time, and that's why we want order and structure for children, so they learn something very, very important. They learn self-control. If the house isn't burning down, I can learn to brush my teeth, right? I can learn cause and effect. I can learn that if I do this, things will get better. If I'm living in chaos and alcoholic craziness around me, or rage attacks, or whatever it is, then my system is always on alert, telling me that something bad's going to happen, and what I might turn into a control freak because I'm always trying to control the world around me. And what happens is we lose self-control, and we start to try to control everything around us that we can't control, and we drive people crazy, and we drive ourselves crazy. That's why the serenity prayer, for example, starts out with, let me change the things I can change, and surrender to things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? But see, people that have control issues, they're afraid that something outside of their control is really going to hurt them, and so we get really, really anxious. Now, if we don't have control issues, stuff can be going on in the other room, or in the family, or in the business, or whatever. Don't really too much get scared of it. But control is a big deal. All right. The opposite of that is self-control, and that's where we can learn to focus on what we can control. That helps anxiety. Okay, the third thing, the threat of, I'm going to say this in a broad term, but it gets to a lot of smaller issues. But the broad term is the threat of imperfection. Now, here's what happens. We can figure out what perfect would be. We all know what an ideal performance would look like. We all know what an ideal term paper would look like. We know what an ideal resume would look like. We know what an ideal body would look like. We know what an ideal whatever would look like. Well, that's great. We should shoot for ideals. That's what makes us get better, activates performance. I talked about that earlier. But what is the tone of the relationship with better? Let me say that again. What is the tone of the relationship with better? If this is all good, the ideal, and you make a 98, what's the tone of that interpretation? Does that mean that it goes all bad? If I don't get it perfect, I'm all bad. Or if I have one problem with you, you're all bad. I'm anxious about, relationships. I better not get close to this person. What if they hurt me? Well, if they have, some issues or whatever, and you're not afraid of them going all bad, or you going all bad, it's not going to have the anxiety in relationships. You see, some severe personality disorders, for example, they don't have stable relationships. They have a lot of anxiety because if that person fails them in one way, then all the rockets go off, right? We get stressed. So we have to look at what is our capacity to deal with the dynamic tension of the desire for goodness and the reality of goodness in our performance or other people's performance and the reality of bad things happening? And can we put that together? And the big threat here for anxiety is I think I can say this word right, the catastrophizing of the negative. See, if we interpret things or feel like any kind of negative, this is an awful thing. Like I've got a friend that if she ever has a dinner party, you wouldn't believe the 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 stress and anxiety of their house that whole day is this pillow's got to be perfect, because anything out of place, oh, it's awful, I'm a failure, all that kind of negative stuff. So we got to look at the good and the bad, and how much can we tolerate something being not okay, and that's okay. That's what we got to get to, because that's all there is anyway, and then we can work to make it better. All right, and then there's a fourth one. How much do we feel in a, now I talked about control earlier, but this is a little bit of a power dynamic in a kind of like a one up and one down position to the adult world. For example, when you're a child, you have adults over you, and they basically have control of you, and they have the ability to judge you. Okay? They're supposed to. All right? They have parental authority. Authority figures sometimes can make us pretty anxious if they're negative or toxic. Now, if that authority figure is the judge inside your own head, now you carry it around with you, and every interaction becomes a threat of being judged or being deemed inferior or one down or not having choices. But what happens with children is they gradually grow up. And then when they get to be 18 or 22, or in California where I live, it's 47, when you get to be finally an adult, then they kind of feel equal with other adults. Now, something big happens when we feel equal with other adults. It doesn't matter what the role is anymore, because you have a boss that's in a different role that on an org chart puts them up here, but when they're giving you feedback, we're peers and there's mutual respect, and you have your thoughts and opinions, and you're not afraid to give those unless they're lording that over you. So the more we can get to a mutual respect, but also internally feel like you come to the table as an equal with other people, even if they're in a higher role, then the better relationships we have with bosses, police officers, regulators, principals of schools, investors, whatever it is that have more power in the role, it's not interpreted personally. It makes us less anxious. Okay, so all of these kinds of factors, the threat for isolation, the threat of our sense of being able to have control over the things affect us, the interpretation of negative or failure or loss, is that going to overwhelm me or ruin me or kill me? And then fourthly, the amount of equality with other people that I feel, all of those go into this soup in the system. If I feel pretty securely attached in my life, connected, got a great support system, you won't believe what happens to the stress level. We can measure this in the brain, that you take somebody under stress and you add support to them, the stress begins to go down just because they're not in it alone. And the control piece, focus on what you can control and don't worry about what you can't, and reinterpret, imperfect performance, and become comfortable with your own opinions and ideas and self-respect, so you don't feel one down to other people. Big deal in all of this stress stuff. So those are some of the major causes of this anxiety threats to our system. Now I'm going to give you one more that we're going to go into when I get to some of the solutions part. You know, part of this anxiety thing, what we see about fear, and what gets, fears that become anxiety problems, are that it really is the anxiety, but then it's the anxiety about the anxiety. And one of the biggest sources of anxiety disorders, kind of, are when somebody feels a normal amount of anxiety, they interpret that anxiety as something really bad. This is what a panic attack is. Somebody feels anxious and they go, oh no, it's getting worse. It's getting worse. Wait. I'm having a heart attack. I'm getting, and they haven't learned to let anxiety kind of be what it is. Now they've got anxiety about the anxiety. And that's when it begins to really blow up. And there's a problem in that what we do then is we move away from the anxiety, makes the anxiety go down, and that reinforces the problem. Because then we can't go close to whatever it is we're anxious about and learn how to deal with it. So all of these are part of the causes, as well as kind of that big topic of prior trauma that we bring into it, post traumatic stress disorder. That's when things that have happened have not been worked through and metabolized and worked through the system, like war trauma or other kinds of trauma, abuse. And then we get into a current situation and something triggers that old memory pattern, and then we begin to have anxiety about it. So these are some of the biggest causes. Now, what we're going to do as we go forward is we're going to look at what you can do about these. So we talked about some of the causes. Let's talk about what we can do about it. Now, one of the ways to look at what you can do about it, if you look at these different clumps that anxiety kind of comes in, there's that situational stuff, and then there's the anxiety of specific fears, what we call phobias, like can't get around elevators or airplanes, or get anxious around certain kinds of situations or topics. And then thirdly, there's kind of that general kind of anxiety, sort of like just people that feel anxious a lot of times. There's social anxiety, and then there's very specific kinds of some circumstances that trigger that post traumatic stress stuff. That's all a clump of all of this. Well, when you begin to look across all of these, there's very specific things that we can do that are kind of short term and help some symptoms. There's some things that all of us ought to be doing all the time anyway. And then there's some of these deeper issues that I talked about earlier. So let's talk about some of the symptom relief stuff. Now, part of this, sometimes, and I don't recommend this, that you go decide you got to do this. You got to see a good psychiatrist. But sometimes, and I'm going to say this right off the bat, sometimes medicine is really important to this. There are some kinds of anxiety disorders that have to do with the body being wired in a certain way that is just getting activated all the time, like panic attacks and other things like that. That certain kind of medications can be very helpful to kind of get the brain to calm down and be what it's supposed to be, more like in a normal state. Now that's different than other kind of medications like tranquilizers that can make the symptom just go away like that. That's a whole nother deal. Those can be useful very specifically for very specific reasons to actually help the treatment get better, and for people to face the things they need to be able to do to function. But they can also build tolerance and can be addictive. So you'll be very careful. Always talk to a doctor about those. Very different, though. Certain kinds of medications versus the tranquilizers. Okay, that's part of it. There's other biological things. You need to go get a good physical. Sometimes things like even blood sugar changes and hypoglycemia and thyroid problems and other hormonal things can affect the way that people feel in a way that is very, very important to be addressed. So make sure you're kind of clear medically. Now, still in that sort of short term thing, there are things that you can do, like learning to breathe. A lot of people have not really learned, or I should say in a different way, they've unlearned or learned bad ways of just breathing. They're not breathing at all. And sometimes this is where we get into that middle ground of things we ought to all be doing anyway. Sometimes things like quiet and getting away, a timeout, daily kind of meditation, prayer, those kinds of centering exercises. And prayer for me is a big one where I'm realizing that I'm not God and I can't control everything in my life, and I know that God is there and bigger, and I can surrender anxieties and thoughts and worries and all of that. Those are all really, really important practices. Exercise, physical movement is really, really important for stress and for a lot of anxiety. Learning how to kind of bracket it and compartmentalize it and put a wall over here and say, I'm only going to think about this, for this portion of the day, or only with my therapist, or only here or there, where you're compartmentalizing physical stuff, looking at your nutrition, eating healthy, sleeping. Sleep's a big, 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 big part of this. Exercise, movement, breathing, meditation, all the kinds of stuff that you can quickly Google. Okay, very, very important. They tend to be, fast acting kind of relief, and they tend to be in that area of things that we ought to, a healthy life ought to look like that anyway. We ought to limit our work. You need rest. You got to get away. You can't be on overload all the time. You got to compartmentalize. You need to take a time out. All that kind of structuring stuff, which a lot of boundaries is about, right? So, having said that, let's get to some of those bigger things we talked about. Number one, I want you to look at the level of secure attachment and support that you have in your life. You will decrease your stress level and you'll decrease your anxiety level by making sure that you put the oxygen thing on you first before you try to deal with somebody else. The most important thing in your life is your support system. Number one, that is the most important thing that you have. It affects health, it affects stress, it affects everything. I want you to get proactive about this, just like you look at your bank account. Are you making deposits in a regular, structured way of your support system? Do you have a regular, ongoing support group, for example? Do you? I give you a great. This doesn't cost you anything other than the price of coffee. My father, who had an anxiety breakdown at 42. They thought he was having a heart attack. They gave him 6 months to live. They finally diagnosed it as it was stress and anxiety. He had to change a lot of things in his life. He got a hobby. He developed a spiritual life. But the other thing he did, he started, get this, taking a morning coffee break, did it every morning at 10 o'clock, and an afternoon coffee break every afternoon at like 3 or 4 o'clock with his two best friends who lived right down the street. And what they did, or worked right down the street, and what they did is they took that break. They didn't even know what they were doing, but they were creating a support system. They did that for 40 years. He lived to 94. Okay, I think that was a big part of it. Now, in our society now, we've got a lot of ways of getting around that, but I want you to look at it. I've got regular support networks and systems that I make sure I guard and are plugged into. And when you're having anxiety, those need to be available to you to reach out and begin to process what you're going through with. That support's going to do a lot in grounding you. Think of an earthquake. An earthquake comes, the buildings that are built up to code, they're grounded with a foundation. That's what support does for you. Number two, control. I want you to look at the situations and people, it's mostly going to be people that you feel like are having control over you. They can control the way you feel, they can control the way you think, they can control your activities, your expenditure of time, this, that, and the other. In one sense, that's what kind of boundaries are about, regaining self control. But I want you to literally, I want you to get specific about this. Here are the things that I have control of. Here are the things I don't have control of. And make it specific. Start with those situations. I can't control this person's substance problem. I can't control this person's rageaholic attacks. I can't control their whatever it is. What I can do is I can control my responses and write down specific things. When they drink, I can do this. I can go visit a friend, or I can have an intervention, or I can take a time out from their moods, or I can go. It's unlimited the options that you have when you begin to think about what you have control of. And we learn to control the things that are going on inside of us, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But if you're going through a bad economy, like one of the worst times in '08, I worked a lot with people on Wall Street who were going through the worst things of stuff they could not control with the economy and the meltdown. And we saw the highest performers begin to focus on every day. They made a list. Here are the things that I can control. I can call my clients. I can create a plan. I can go through a narrative. I can develop options. And they started to realize I'm not powerless, and when our powerlessness goes down, our anxiety goes down. So look at the areas where you think people or circumstances have control of you, okay? And gain that control back in terms of what you can control. Good boundaries. I'm not going to be scared to answer the phone if I know I can say no, right? I'm not going to be scared to go out on a date if somebody is mean or inappropriate or whatever. If I know I can mace them or leave. When I was growing up, all the girls were told by their mothers before cell phones, you've got your bad date money in your pocket, right? Which means that's to call the taxi with, right? So you know that you've got control in these areas of life. Number three, and this is a big one. This is probably where I would guess a majority of people that are suffering from anxiety disorders could do well to address. And that's that third category of here's what's perfect and here's what's real. How do I interpret that gap? If I lose my job, bad occurrence, but is it catastrophic? I still have the people that love me. I still have my talents. I still have a lot of stuff that, is in my life. But some people think if that happens, it's the end of the world. Or if I have the party and the place isn't looking exactly perfect, it's the end of the world. I want you to begin to look at how you interpret imperfection. Okay. And I want you to get comfortable with imperfection because, as Woody Allen said, reality's not a perfect place, but it's the only place you can get a good steak. Well, that's just true. A perfect relationship doesn't exist. But even though there are negatives, we can develop a lesser alarmed state of if things aren't perfect, if things aren't right, why is that such a big deal? You hear this conventional wisdom. Why are you getting upset about that? That's a really important question. But what people with anxiety disorders have never done is they've never asked, why does my system get so upset at something so small? What they do is they never look at that and observe it. So you got to get above it. And then you've got to start to really look at my reactions are way bigger than they should be. I got alarm systems going off on very small things. That's ridiculous. I wouldn't want my car alarm going off just when the wind blows a little bit. I want it to wait till somebody's actually breaking the door. Okay? So look at your interpretation of, do you turn it into a catastrophe? Do you tell yourself you're all bad? Do you tell yourself you're a loser? Do you tell yourself that there's nothing good left in my future? Remember, all of this stuff has to do with how our system interprets anything that's imperfect. Now, there are bad things. I know that. Okay? But we live through them. Okay? And there also is a big distinction between what's really bad and what's not really that bad. If somebody dies, that's really bad. If there's a catastrophic illness or a hurricane, that's really, really bad. But if I get a B on my term paper, or if my boss didn't like what I'm going to present, or I lose a customer, or, there is such a continuum, and anxiety disorders by and large don't have a continuum of telling the system when to be anxious. So we've got to look at reinterpreting how we look at negative things, basically, and rewiring the way our thinking and our belief system comes along to sort of look at that. You take a Navy SEAL and they're getting shot at, they get aroused and activated to perform. They don't have a panic attack. Shoot at me, I'm going to get a panic attack probably. Okay. But that has to do with training and reworking the brain. And the more you focus on that, with treatment. And treatment might mean formal or informal. It might see a therapist. It might be processing it with your friends. It's what a good support group does. We help each other reframe stuff and put stuff in different perspective, and also begin to monitor yourselves about the kinds of things that you're telling yourself. And then in that fourth category of feeling one down to the rest of the world, it's time to grow up. And I want you to start to chart out, what are your beliefs? What are your opinions? What are your talents? And really begin to develop competency in these areas where if somebody disagrees or something's demanded from you, a lot of people will ask me, how do I get over stage fright? I want to get over stage fright or performance anxiety so I can perform. And I say, well, how much have you been performing? They say, well, I can't, I'm afraid. Well, anxiety doesn't work that way. Now, when we get in these other areas like flying and specific fears and this, that, and the other, competency, this fourth area, developing competency, developing the skills. If I can't walk very well, I'm a toddler, I'm kind of scared until I can, and then I can, and once I can, I do it unconsciously. I'm not afraid anymore. Well, life is like that too. You heard the old people say, you fell off the horse, get back on the horse. Exactly what all the research would tell us. So what we've got to do is we've got to face these areas that make us anxious. And the more and 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 more you face them and enter into them, the anxiety is not going to go away in the beginning. You've got to just ignore it. It's going to be there and continue to focus on what you're doing. You're going to build competencies in these areas. The anxiety is going to begin to go down. Don't let anxiety cause you to avoid situations that are normal. Say that again. Don't let anxiety cause you to avoid situations that are normal. Anxiety should cause you to not run into a gunfight. Anxiety should not cause you to not go outside on a perfectly normal day. So if you feel that, you got to move into it, and that's where treatment, support, and all that can help. Okay, a few quick things. Look up mindfulness. In fact, I've got a whole section on mindfulness, but it's the ability to feel anxiety and anxious thoughts and all that without grabbing them, just letting them be there. The more you can let your anxiety just be and continue to live, the living teaches you to not be anxious. It's an inverse relationship. And mindfulness and prayer and just being with the anxiety can actually begin to cause it to go down. Okay? Hope this has been helpful to you. Anxiety will rob you of a lot of stuff, but it can be gotten over, and I'm a living testimony. I used to have a lot of anxiety. Don't have too much anymore. Took a while, took a lot of work, but life's more fun. So I want to encourage you to begin to do it and face yours. Welcome to this audio story called The Anatomy of Panic Attack. Oh boy, I don't know if you've ever had one or not, but if you have, you know what I'm talking about. These things are awful. And if you haven't, then hopefully this will give you some education to empathize with those who have had them or do have them, or equip you for if you ever do have them. Because you know what? A lot of people have them. And I'm going to say it again, they are awful. But let me start by giving you some really, really good news. And the good news is they are so treatable. We see it all the time. People get over them all the time. You can get there. Okay. But the second thing is that they need treatment. So I want to say this right off the bat. Here's the disclaimer. This audio story is not meant in any way to be treatment or a substitute for treatment. It's to educate you about them so you can get some, but you know what one is. So it's an anatomy of panic attack. And I'm going to let you know kind of what panic attacks are about and how they work and what causes them and also what can help them. So you are going to learn some things in here that are probably going to help you if you can put them to practice. But I do want to say it again. I really encourage you to get some professional help if you have them. All right. So point number one, did I already say these things are awful? Well, let me say that again because they are awful. Let me give you kind of a picture of what a panic attack looks like. By the way, I'm a psychologist, and so, I've read and studied and treated a gazillion people with panic attacks and done that successfully and seen them get over them. But I'm going to tell you more than that. I know what one's like because I had some, and I never had any for a long, long time. And it's just few years back that I actually had some, and I'll tell you that story a little later. But let's start out with what they actually are. Okay, basically, when you have a panic attack, it's this little period of time. When I say a little period of time, it takes about probably up to 15 to 30 minutes. That's kind of what the norm is that they can be. But whatever the time period is, it is a time of incredible fear, incredible, overwhelming, intense fear with all sorts of different symptoms, mainly falling in the body and the mind. And the body just starts to go crazy. You can have heart palpitations or sweat or start to tremble. Some people have chest pain. They think they're having a heart attack. That's one of the things that we see happen the most is people actually end up in the emergency room because they think they're having a heart attack. They get lightheaded and dizzy. And if they don't think they're having a heart attack, then the mind part starts to trip into it, and they think I'm going crazy, and there's a real fear of going crazy. I'm losing my mind. I'm losing control. And then this thing gets kind of triggered to where you feel like you got to escape the danger or flee or get away in some way, and your breathing changes. And it just is awful. And sometimes they can be so sudden and unexpected, come out of nowhere. And then other times, for some people, some specific context can bring it about. Sometimes they can be, isolated where somebody's never even had one before and they might not ever have one again, but it can just happen. So, what does it feel like? Well, racing, heartbeat, pounding heartbeat. You can have chest pains, like I said, get dizzy. Some people get nauseated. Your breathing changes. You can feel like you can't even breathe. You're having difficulty breathing. You can begin to have like chills or the opposite. You start to have sweating. Some people start to even feel like they've got tingling or numbness somewhere like in their hands, or perceptual distortions like the world is changing and things look far away and then they're close or then it's spinning or something, and this awful fear of just losing control and doing something awfully like embarrassing. And some people literally think they're dying, and they just think, I'm about to die. I'm dying. I know I'm dying. But all of these add up to something that we're going to see in a little bit. Your mind is basically beginning to determine that there is an impending doom of some sort, and there's this sense of an impending doom. And as we're going to see, that's one of the things that goes wrong is you get a sense of impending doom when there is none, but then your mind has to make sense of it. And so they're saying, well, something bad's going to happen. I have a heart attack. I'm going to die. The plane's going down or something. And then it turns into that whole mind thing where you begin to worry about it. And there you go. You have got now a panic attack, and then it's escalating. And that's the big problem is it just starts to escalate, and it's out of your control because it's happening from, some parts of the brain that really you don't have, like a direct little handle on. You can't, oh, I'm going to, flip the circuit breaker there and turn that thing off. And so what happens is partly because all this fear and everything is out of your control, then you really get afraid of it. And that is almost, in my way of thinking, and I think that, science is behind this, it's the big phrase that we need to basically remember about panic attack. And here's the phrase: it's basically not the fear, but it's the fear of the fear. And we're going to see that, fear is pretty normal and all of these sensations are normal. Pretty much everybody can have them. But when you start to get afraid of the actual fear itself, it's the fear of the fear. Oh my gosh. Oh no, I'm feeling it. Here it comes. Oh, wait. And we're fearing the fear. Then the fear of the fear even causes more escalation. And then guess what happens? It's that old phrase you've heard it before, probably in your own head. And it says, what if? What if? What if? What if? What if this happens? What if I can't stop it? What if I faint? What if I go crazy? What if I have a heart attack? What if somebody notices this? What if I get fired because they notice this? What if I can't make the sale? What if I can't get through? What if? What if? What if? And that what if just leads to more. All right, so now you got a picture of it. Hope it didn't, scare you too much there, but there's help if I did, because it is so awful, and I empathize with you. But hopefully you're going to get some encouragement out of this. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about a panic attack. Well, let's start with the body. Okay, here's the deal. You have some equipment that sits on top of your shoulders. It's called your head, and it has in it a brain. And your brain has got a lot of different complicated systems to it, but it's designed to let you know when there is danger. And you've got some fear centers. It's sort of like the neighborhood watch office or the alarm, company that monitors a house or something. It's sort of like, mission control. Are we under siege, or are we at peacetime? Well, what happens is these fear centers can get triggered. Okay, there's this part of your brain called the amygdala, and what happens is when that amygdala is activated, it starts to go danger, 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 danger. And that sense of danger that can trip that alarm, it could be some sort of a direct kind of sensory input. In other words, you notice, oh, my heart skipped a beat, or I'm feeling flush, or it's hot in here, or the plane just, bounced, or some kind of something that you really sense it is true, it's real, or it can come from a thought. What if? What if this? Oh my gosh! What? But that amygdala gets waked up, and now it's awake, and now it's starting to send out, some alarms, or they can be triggered not by just sensory input or thoughts, but also by memories or associations. You could actually your brain has a lot of associations to it, and you can see something maybe in a movie or even walking down the street that would trigger a memory that's connected to some other memory that's connected to a time when something really dangerous was going on and there was a reason to be afraid. And so now we've got the trigger of the alarm system. Now the alarm system has gone off, and you've heard it before. It triggers something called fight or flight, and that signals this whole alarm system turning on. Danger, danger, danger. It's like fire alarms going off in the building. And boy, does it do that. That is, you're wired, and you're wired to do this. And that's when all these all these stress hormones and all this stuff begins to just flow through your brain. Think of it like you've seen it on TV or you've seen it in real when there's something dangerous going on in the city. What happens? All the ambulances and the fire trucks are going down the city streets. You see their sirens going on because all of the danger, the things that fight danger, have been activated and they've been sent out. That's what happens in your head. It's a physiological reaction. And then when that fear center gets triggered, that's something like I said, there's no switch that you can go off, right? But it's a system. It kind of it goes off, but the higher systems of your brain, here's the good news, the higher systems of your brain and other systems inside of you are actually designed to calm it down. Okay, when a police car gets sent out, they say it's danger, and then they get a call back at dispatcher and says, "Oh, false alarm." Then they radio the police car and say, "No, it was just a false alarm. What happened?" What happens? The police turns off the siren. It slows down. Now we're back to normal. So your brain really is designed to kind of get activated if something's danger, but then to calm itself down when it's not. And that's just sort of normal, right? You get spooked and you turn around. Oh, it's just a friend of mine. Well, and then it calms down. But see, sometimes you get too activated and you get too spooked and it's outside of your control. The system's going crazy. And then the dispatcher can't get through. And you tell yourself, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Oh no, I'm still afraid. Oh, I told myself not to be afraid. Now I'm afraid. Now it's even worse. What if I can't stop it? And now you're down that road. Okay. But remember, it starts with a sensation or it starts with a thought or it starts with a memory or whatever it does, then the system has been activated. Okay. And sometimes it can be, the stuff in our heads, it can be our view of the world that can trigger these. A lot of times people have had stuff happen to them that have taught them belief systems that they learned honestly the world is not a safe place. It's got to be hyper vigilant. Okay. Sometimes it can be our view of the world. We know, for example, some people see the world in very safe and optimistic ways, and other people see it very pessimistically, like, you better watch out, something bad's going to happen, the sky's falling. And those views that we have actually can have a lot to do with all sorts of anxieties. Another view that can live in our mind is, what is my ability to handle it? What's my ability to handle things that come at me? How able do I feel? And what we're going to see, and it's part of the getting better and the way treatment works for panic disorder, is that your mind is going to learn something. Oh, I can handle this, and your ability is going to get stronger. So there's another little piece of the good news. Sometimes feelings can trigger, and our interpretation of feelings. We have a thought, and then we have or a feeling, then we have a thought about the feeling, and there you go. And the way we perceive our different feelings and our states really has a lot to do with a panic attack. So you might have something like some increase in your heart rate, and then this automatic thought goes off, oh no, something's wrong. And then you start to worry, you get preoccupied with it, and then once you do that, then you can't breathe, and then you say, oh no, I'm going to faint. And then we get more afraid, and then your body starts to react, and all this stuff goes through your head, like, what if the world's ending, what if I'm dying? And it just goes and goes and goes, and then you start to feel like there's no way out. I mean, what do I do? And there you go. Okay, so that's kind of the way this works. It's highly physiological. Okay, and even if you just felt it in your sense of worry, which is rare, you really feel it throughout your body and all this breathing and all this other stuff. But it is, even if you didn't and you felt it in your mind, it just is just awful. Is basically the bottom line. All right, so that's kind of the way this works. It's basically the alarm system goes off when there's no fire. Okay, now You know what? If the building were on fire and you all of a sudden got scared, that's surely a good thing because you got to run out. You fight or flight. You got to either fight that fire if you got a fire extinguisher, or you run out of the building. The problem with panic disorder is the alarm is going off and there's no fire, but your body and your mind don't know that. I'm going to say that again. The alarm is going off, so you feel every bit of certainty that the world or life is coming to an end, or your safety is coming to an end, and you are certain because you're designed to feel like you're certain when you're having those chemicals flow through you. Okay? But it's just a false alarm. Okay? Now, here's the deal. When we are in one of these, and I say we, I've had them. I told you that. I never knew what one was until just, a handful of years ago. But when we have them, the first thing we say is we try to talk ourselves out of it, and we're going to see that doesn't work. And so let's talk a little bit about the way out of this thing. All right. So basically, now remember, I said get some treatment. All right. And there's psychological treatment, which you need, and we need to get into the psychology of this, and see somebody that knows what they're doing so they can help you. But at the same time, sometimes there's actual medicine that can help. We know there are certain kinds of biological states that can trigger this. This is why it's important to see a good doctor. And we know that a lot of times some, and I'm not meaning just tranquilizers, because all tranquilizers do is sort of calm you down in the moment. I'm talking about getting to the biology that's actually triggering the alarm system. Right? But apart from that, I tell you need to get some professional help. But let me tell you kind of the way the treatment path tends to go, so you're kind of educated about this. So number one, this is a false alarm, right? Your body and your mind is going crazy telling you there's a fire or there's a robbery, and it is acting exactly like it's true, and you are going to feel it as if it's true. Now, here's what happens. Have you ever been asleep and say a big truck goes down your street, and because it rattles a lot or makes a lot of vibrations or noise, what happens is all the alarms start going off, the car alarms, because of the vibrations, and you hear them down there. There's nobody still in the car, but the alarms are going off. That's what's happening. And what happens is you wake up and you go, oh gosh, that's just a bunch of car alarms. And you wait a little while. What happens? They turn off, right? They're designed to turn off after a while. Well, that's pretty much how your system is. So here's the thing. What you've got to do is, first of all, you got to normalize it. See, it's normal to have a false alarm. And if you've ever been in an airport and the alarm goes off and then they come over the loudspeaker and say, don't worry, it's a false alarm, we're working on it, we're trying to turn it off, then you kind of go back to reading your magazine. Well, you can't just say, okay, don't be scared. That's the trick of panic attacks. What we've got to do, instead of talk yourself out of it, the way you talk yourself out of it really is by not talking yourself into that it's true that there's a fire, but talking yourself into accepting that you're having a panic attack. There's the fear. Or however you say this to yourself, here's the principle. It's got to be normalized. And that's exactly the opposite of what we want to do. See, if we start to get activated and afraid, we start to get afraid of the fear, and we start to try to fight the fear. We try to do something around it. We engage with it, and you grab it and start to do all this stuff. But the way panic attacks are treated is basically by learning to normalize what you're feeling, learning to be aware of it, noticing it, accepting it, observing it without identifying with it. So what does that look like? Let me say it again. We're going to normalize it. We're going to learn to be aware of it. We're going to notice it and accept it, observe it, but not identify with it. And you see the difference in that? Let's say my heart starts beating or I start to have panic or racing thoughts or whatever. To notice it and normalize it would be to begin to say things like, oh, there's that feeling. Let me look at it. Let me watch it. Oh, my heart's palpitating. Oh, there it is. I can feel I'm starting to sweat. That's okay. That's just normal. See, I'm not trying to talk myself out of it. What I'm doing is I'm embracing it, I'm accepting it instead of fighting it. Okay? And I'm also not identifying with it. What I mean by that is, I'm not saying the house really is on fire. I am having a heart attack. See, we're going to learn to treat the crazy thoughts and treat the crazy sensations as exactly what they are. Oh, there's that feeling again. And just let it be. Just let it be. So, actually, the first step is to normalize it and not fight it and not identify with it. Okay. I don't think she'd mind me telling you this, but my youngest daughter Lucy, when she was um, a few years ago, when she was younger, she got locked in the bathroom actually on an airplane, and the lock got sort of stuck, and she couldn't get out. They went through a bunch of turbulence, and she really that kind of started her, sort of having panic. So I taught her a little formula. And the formula was, okay, Lucy, instead of when you get scared of something, instead of, avoiding it or whatever it is, or getting worse, here's what I want you to do. I want you to accept it. I would talk to her about it. Just accept. So where are you feeling it? I'm feeling it in my chest, Daddy. My heart is okay. Tell me what that's like. Just tell me what it feels like. See, I'm not trying to say don't be scared. I'm saying just describe it to me. Just sit with it. In fact, I've helped people get over panic attacks by in the middle of one saying, let's see how scared we can get. Okay. Let's just see how far this thing can go. Let's ride the roller coaster. Because once you accept it, and like Lucy learned, see it, accept it, let it be there, you sit with it, and then you just kind of, go about your business. But you're not trying to make it go away. Now, see, what happens is the very act of not fighting it and accepting it is telling your brain, oh, that's just a crazy false alarm because now we're not identifying with it. I have actually a coworker that had panic attacks on airplanes, and one time our group was making a trip, and I was sitting next to her on the airplane. She started to have one, and basically I said, "Okay, we can fix this." And she was fighting and everything. I said, "Okay, I just want you to start to describe it to me. Where do you feel it? I feel it here. Don't fight it. Just feel it. Point to the part of your body where you feel what's happening, and just sat there and said, let's just see how bad it can get. Just walk through it and walk through it and walk through it and just accept it. Let it be there. Let's just feel it." And basically, long story short, I have to tell the story on another one. In fact, I should interview her sometime. But basically, by learning to accept it, by the end of the flight, it would start to come. She goes, "Here it comes again." I said, "Okay, let's welcome it. Let's just, where do you feel it? What are the thoughts? The plane's going down. Okay, well, there's one of those crazy thoughts. Let's just let it be there. What are the thoughts?" So instead of fighting them, letting them be there. So finally, like three-quarters of the way into the flight, I said, "So get scared." She said, "I can't. I'm not getting scared anymore." And it doesn't always get cured that fast. I mean, usually this is a process. But what happens is the more you can just allow it to be, the more your brain is going to learn this is no big deal, and then it's going to stop telling the alarm to go off. And that's the paradox. Once you're not afraid of the fear, then the fear can be there without developing the fear of the fear because we're going to accept it, and then the fear goes away. But we're not going to demand the fear go away, are we? We're going to do the opposite. We're going to accept it. Okay? So it starts with noticing and accepting and saying, it's okay. I'm just having a panic attack. And that starts to trigger, actually, the relaxation response because the adult enters the room, right? The adult enters the room, and by telling yourself, this is okay, I'm just going to feel it, then we've actually started to calm it down. But remember, we're not requiring that it calm down. We're just going to let it be there. And the hard part of this is training yourself to just notice and observe and let it be there. Turn towards it, embrace it without judging it as being awful, without, going to the next level of thinking, just saying, oh, there it is. Oh, my heart's about to pop out of my chest again. Oh, there's my breathing, it's starting to get shallow and all this. And so that's basically the way this works. The more you can just accept it and let it be there, then your higher brain is learning not to be afraid. That triggers the relaxation response because you're going to recognize the feelings as this is a temporary false alarm, just like it happens when the car alarms go off. Gosh, I'll be glad when, this is everything's kind of loud, but it's just normal. So here's the deal. Sometimes, you can't stop or control your thoughts, and these crazy thoughts or sensations are going to go through your mind or your body, but you can get better at not identifying with them or believing them and just letting them be there. Then if you're not afraid of having them, there's no panic attack, there's just kind of these feelings, right? And that is the paradox. I'll tell you a little bit about me. So, and I, figured out the cause later, but basically the cause was I had three deaths in my family, really, really quick, and it was the same time that I had a lot of work going on, and it was an awful, 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 awful time period. But because three deaths, boom, just one right after the other. My mother died, my father died, my brother-in-law was killed, and it was the same time that work was getting hugely overloaded because it was in the financial meltdown of '08, and I work with leaders, and I just had 8 times as much, you know, to do all of a sudden, and I basically just kept going. I really wasn't dealing with any of this stuff, and happened, I think, about midway through the next year. I kind of thought I was through all this, right? Well, I really hadn't dealt with anything, but I thought I was through it all. And I actually walked onto a speaking platform in an arena with thousands and thousands of people in the audience, like I've done 1,000 times before, which I enjoy and is fun. And I got up there and I'm speaking, and all of a sudden, I started like totally feeling it, like panicked, and like the anxiety started to escalate, and literally the room started spinning, and I'm sitting there talking to thousands of people, and I'm having this kind of almost dual out of the body experience because I'm sitting there talking and giving this talk, but inside this thing is escalating and escalating and escalating. I'm getting more and more, and I knew I'm going down. I knew I was going to faint. I knew I was going to, and then I just something like it was kind of decision time because I wanted to run off the stage, but then I thought if I and I don't know what triggered it, but then a third person entered my head, and that was the psychologist. So now I got the speaker, I got the panicker, but now the psychologist stepped in. I don't know, why, but I realized, oh my gosh, I'm having a panic attack. And then I knew, Henry, if you leave the stage, you're gonna probably never get back on one. You don't give in to this thing. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to calm down. So my other option is, well, I'll just keep talking till I faint, and then they'll come take me off the stage, and then I at least won't be like I freaked out. And so I just kind of kept talking, and as I did, because I just kind of accepted it, then it went away, and I went, wow, I'm glad that's gone. And as soon as I said, I'm glad that's gone, now what have I done? Now I've said, I'm glad that's gone. Oh no, because when it was there, it was, is it starting again? Did I have it again? And then the pattern started. And so only because I knew, just because treat panic attacks, I knew what it was, and I had learned that you just have to let it be there. And so it was a while. It's the better part. I'm going to say, oh, it was months and months that each time I would go speak, I would feel it coming on, and I learned to invite it because I knew I had to get up there. And I said, okay, if I get up there and I faint, big deal. If I start to feel it, I might even tell the audience, you know what, I'm freaking out up here, but I'm going to keep talking because it'll be okay. And if I faint, y'all haul me off in an ambulance or whatever. And gradually, by doing pretty much what I told you, as well as, starting to go through some of that grief and dealing with what I've been through, then, it went away. And I haven't had one years now. But I'm telling you this to tell you that two things. One, it can happen to any of us. There's 8,000 reasons. But also, I want you to have some hope. Because once you can learn to go through this process, and you're going to probably need some professional help to do this, but once you can learn to accept it, lean into it, let it be there, be aware of it, not be afraid of the fear, but let the fear be there. Now, again, notice I'm not telling you don't be afraid, right? I'm saying, oh, there's the fear. Oh, there's my heart racing. Oh, there's that palpitation. There's my mind racing. This is interesting. It's happening. It's like you can watch the birds fly through your head and be an observer, but you don't have to grab the birds or build a nest. You've heard that before. You're just going to let it be there and then kind of just get involved in what you're doing and just let it be there. Here's the thing to remember. Nobody dies from panic attack. You're going to feel like you're going to die, but you're going to learn to realize this thing is just going to run its course, and I'm not going to be afraid of it. It's just be there, and then it's just going to go away because the system can't stay activated that long. All right, so that's kind of the anatomy of a panic attack. That's sort of how it works, and the treatments tend to be very successful treatment with somebody who knows what they're doing in cognitive behavioral therapy. Some dynamic kinds of therapies can be very helpful. Some kinds, particular classes of medications like SSRIs can be very, very helpful. Another thing that can really be helpful is something called mindfulness. If you've ever read about mindfulness or taken a mindfulness class or learned the technique, basically that's what it is. It's just learning to notice your thoughts and notice your feelings and not be afraid of them. And sometimes reading something or taking a class on that or seeing a therapist about that can really, really be helpful, as well as other spiritual practices like prayer and meditation, all of that. So there really are a lot of ways to help this, but the main thing is I want you to have hope that once you know that there's hope and you can get some help, that panic disorder is something that you can absolutely, absolutely, absolutely be helped with. And spiritually, as you begin to get into a different place and those mindsets and emotionally and all of this growth that we talk about in 1,000 different ways, you can have hope that panic disorder is something you can actually get some help with. Okay? Hope that's helpful to you. Let me know. Give me your feedback. And I hope that you can also, maybe if you know somebody, pass it on to them, because I wanted everybody to have hope in this area. All right? See you guys next time. Bye-bye.